The New York sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors as she left the building, nodding to the security guard who had once been part of their program himself. She walked past the spot where her life had changed a year ago, pausing briefly to leave a business card with a homeless woman huddled there. "Just in case you're ready for a change," she said softly, remembering how it felt to be in that position. The woman looked up, seeing someone who truly saw her, and for a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. The same hope that had sparked in Catherine's eyes 1 year ago. 1 year later, the grand conference room at Trump Tower buzzed with anticipation. Business leaders, community organizers, and press representatives filled every seat. At the podium, Catherine stood tall, her professional attire and confident posture a world away from that cold evening in the doorway. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was invisible, one of the thousands of people you pass on the streets without seeing. Today, I stand before you not just as a success story, but as a bridge between two worlds that rarely meet." The room fell silent, captivated by her presence. In the front row, Trump sat beside Dr. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez, watching the woman who had once been his academic rival command the room with a different kind of authority, one born from experience rather than just expertise. "Our new community investment program isn't about charity," Catherine continued, clicking through slides that showed the impact of their first year's work. "It's about recognizing that talent and potential can be found in unexpected places, that sometimes the greatest returns come from investing in people others have written off." She shared statistics. 50 former homeless individuals now employed, 30 families reunited, 20 small business loans granted to people rebuilding their lives. But more compelling than the numbers were the stories she told, stories of real people who, like her, had found their way back. "We've created something unique," she explained, gesturing to the charts behind her. "A program that combines financial support with mental health services, job training, and most importantly, dignity. We don't just give people handouts, we give them tools, respect, and opportunities." In the audience, several board members nodded approvingly. The program's success was undeniable, both in human terms and on the bottom line. The positive publicity alone had been worth the investment, but the real value went deeper. They were creating a model other companies were eager to follow. "But perhaps our most important achievement," Catherine said, her voice softening slightly, "has been changing how people see themselves. When you've lost everything, you start to believe that's all you deserve. Breaking that belief is harder than breaking any cycle of poverty." She paused, taking a sip of water, then smiled as she noticed a familiar face slipping into the back of the room, her sister, attending one of her presentations for the first time. Their relationship, though still healing, had grown stronger over the past year. "I'm often asked if I'm angry about what happened to me," Catherine continued. "The truth is, I'm grateful." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. "Not for the hardships, but for what they taught me." About resilience, yes, but more importantly, about the power of one person choosing to see another person's worth. She glanced at Trump, then back to the audience. "That's what our program does. We look for people who haven't given up on themselves, even when the world has. We invest in their potential, just as someone once invested in mine." The presentation concluded with a video showing their new training center, where former executives who had fallen on hard times now taught business skills to others climbing back from rock bottom. The applause was genuine and prolonged. Afterward, as people gathered for refreshments, Trump watched Catherine move through the crowd with easy grace, answering questions and sharing her vision for the program's future. She was in her element, but in a new way, her old financial brilliance now tempered with deep empathy and understanding. "You know what the best part is?" she said quietly when she finally made her way to him. "Every time I walk past that doorway now, I stop and really look at the people there. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to really see someone else." Trump nodded, remembering that cold evening that felt like a lifetime ago. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, "something that will last." Catherine smiled, watching as one of their program graduates confidently presented their success metrics to a group of interested investors. "We all did," she corrected. "Sometimes life's harvest falls lead us exactly where we need to be." As the evening wound down, Catherine gathered her things, ready to head to her weekly volunteer session at the shelter. She had kept this commitment even after her rise to her new position, saying it helped her stay grounded and reminded her of what really mattered. The next few months brought changes that no one, not even Trump, could have predicted. Spring had arrived in New York, bringing with it new beginnings. In a modest but comfortable apartment provided by Trump's foundation, Catherine sat at her desk, reviewing her progress notes before her weekly meeting with Dr. Chen. The apartment walls held a few carefully chosen photographs, her parents in happier times, her college graduation, and a new one. A small group picture from a volunteer event at the local shelter where she now spent her Saturday mornings. Her old financial certificates, recovered from storage, hung beside more recent achievements, completion certificates from computer training courses and counseling programs. A knock at the door brought a smile to her face. It was Mrs. Thompson, her neighbor from across the hall, who had become something of a surrogate mother figure over the past months. "Just checking if you're ready for your big presentation tomorrow," she said, carrying a plate of homemade cookies. Nervous, Catherine admitted, accepting a cookie. "It's been so long since I've spoken in front of people who—" She paused, searching for words. "Who knew me before?" The presentation she was preparing for would be her first official act in her new role at Trump's organization. She would be speaking to a room full of executives about their new community outreach program. But more than that, she would be telling her story. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. After months of careful communication through Dr. Chen, they had finally begun talking again. Small steps. First a birthday card, then an email, and now occasional texts. Her sister's kids were doing well in their new schools thanks to the educational fund Trump had quietly established. Catherine looked at her reflection in the window. Her hair was styled simply but neatly, her clothes professional but comfortable. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something deeper, not just confidence but wisdom. The kind that only comes from falling down and getting back up. Her weekly schedule showed how far she'd come. Monday meetings with Mr. Rodriguez to review her financial progress. Her medical debt was slowly being resolved through a combination of negotiation and a payment plan. Therapy sessions with Dr. Chen, now reduced to twice a month, volunteer work at the shelter, and her new responsibilities at Trump's organization. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still nights when she woke up in a cold sweat, terrified she was back on the streets. Days when the shame of her past threatened to overwhelm her. Moments when seeing an old colleague on the street made her want to hide. Dr. Chen had helped her understand that these feelings were normal, even healthy, part of processing trauma rather than burying it. "Your story is your strength," she often reminded Catherine. "Every scar is a lesson learned, every setback a step toward understanding others better." The evening before her presentation, Trump stopped by to check on her preparation. He found her surrounded by notes and presentation slides, obsessing over every detail just like she used to do before their school debates. "The board members might be tough," she said, looking up from her papers. "They'll want to know why they should invest in community programs during a tight economy." Trump smiled, remembering how she used to challenge their economics teacher with similar practical questions. "That's exactly why I wanted you for this role," he said. "You understand both sides now. The business logic and the human cost. That's rare." Catherine nodded, then gestured to a small plant on her windowsill, a cutting from a larger one at the shelter. "You know what one of the shelter volunteers told me?" She said sometimes the strongest plants come from cuttings. They develop their own root system, become their own thing entirely. The city lights twinkled outside her window as evening fell. From this view, she could see both the glittering towers of success and the quieter streets below where she had once sought shelter. The contrast no longer filled her with shame, but with purpose. "I'm not trying to go back to who I was before," she said thoughtfully, organizing her presentation one last time. "That's what I finally understood. I'm becoming someone new, someone who can bridge both worlds." Trump watched as she moved around the apartment with growing confidence, preparing for tomorrow. He remembered the woman he found huddled in that doorway just months ago and marveled at the human spirit's capacity for renewal. But more than that, he understood that her transformation wasn't just about having resources and opportunities, it was about having the courage to try again, to trust again, to hope again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hotel suite's windows as Trump arrived for breakfast. Catherine looked different now, clean clothes, neatly combed hair, and a hint of her old confidence returning. She sat at the small table, hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, taking in the simple pleasure of this normal morning routine. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet," Trump said, gesturing to a woman who entered the room behind him. "This is Dr. Chen, one of the best therapists in New York. She's helped many people rebuild their lives." The doctor smiled warmly, carrying herself with a gentle professionalism that immediately put Catherine at ease. "And this," Trump continued as another person entered, "is Mr. Rodriguez, a financial advisor who specializes in fresh starts." The advisor nodded respectfully, carrying a leather portfolio. He's helped people navigate their way back from bankruptcy, medical debt, and other financial challenges. Catherine looked overwhelmed, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. I don't know how I could afford." "Don't worry about that right now," Trump interrupted gently. "Remember what we said yesterday? One step at a time. Today's step is just talking, making a plan. That's all." As they sat around the table, enjoying a breakfast of fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee, the conversation flowed naturally. Dr. Chen asked thoughtful questions about Catherine's experiences, while Mr. Rodriguez took notes about her financial situation. There was no judgment, only problem-solving. "Your medical debt is significant," Mr. Rodriguez said, reviewing the numbers Catherine had shared, "but not insurmountable. There are programs we can explore, negotiations we can make with the hospitals." He spoke with quiet confidence, making complex financial terms sound manageable. Dr. Chen added her perspective. "The emotional toll of losing everything can be as challenging as the practical obstacles, but I've seen many people rebuild their lives, their confidence, their sense of self. It takes time, but it's possible." Trump watched as Catherine's posture gradually changed throughout the morning. With each piece of practical advice, each offered solution, her shoulders straightened a little more. The lost look in her eyes began to be replaced by something he recognized from their school days: determination. "There's one more thing," Trump said, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. "I have a position opening up in my organization. We're starting a new initiative focused on corporate responsibility and community investment. It needs someone with both financial expertise and," he paused meaningfully, "real-world perspective." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she took the folder. "You want me to?" She couldn't finish the sentence. "To help lead it," Trump confirmed. "Not today, not next week. First, we focus on your health, physical and mental. You'll work with Dr. Chen and start the treatments you need. Mr. Rodriguez will help structure a financial recovery plan. Meanwhile, you'll have a comfortable place to stay and time to heal." He leaned forward, his voice serious. "Then, when you're ready, this position will be waiting. Because who better to shape corporate responsibility than someone who's seen both sides of the system?" Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't want special treatment," she said firmly, a flash of her old spirit showing through. "Good, because this isn't special treatment," Trump replied with a slight smile. "This is smart business. I need someone who understands finance, but also understands human struggle. Someone who can see the big picture and the individual stories. That's not charity, that's valuable expertise." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Healing often comes through helping others. Your experience, though painful, has given you unique insights." Mr. Rodriguez added, "And while you're recovering, we can work on rebuilding your credit, addressing the medical bills, and creating a sustainable financial foundation." The morning sun grew stronger, filling the room with warm light. Outside, the city was fully awake now, bustling with its usual energy. But inside this room, something quieter and more profound was taking place: the careful, thoughtful planning of one person's journey back from the edge. Trump watched as Catherine began to engage more actively in the discussion, asking questions, taking notes, the spark of her old intelligence mixing with her hard-earned wisdom. He knew there would be challenges ahead, setbacks and difficult days. But he also knew that sometimes people just needed a door to open. After that, their own strength could carry them through. Trump stood up slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. The street had grown quieter now, with only the occasional taxi rushing past. He looked at Catherine, still wrapped in his coat, and made a decision that came from somewhere deeper than business instinct. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. When she hesitated, he added, "Please." Just trust me one more time, like when you helped me with that impossible calculus problem before finals." A ghost of a smile crossed her face at the memory. "You would have figured it out eventually," she said softly, the echo of their old friendly rivalry briefly lighting up her eyes. "Maybe," Trump replied, "but you made it easier. Now it's my turn." He kept his hand extended, patient, understanding her hesitation. After what felt like an eternity, she reached up and took it. As she gathered her few belongings, a backpack, some books, and a small photo album, Trump made a quick phone call. Within minutes, a black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, sensing the delicacy of the situation, didn't bat an eye as he opened the door for them. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked, clutching her worn backpack to her chest as she settled into the leather seat. The warmth of the car made her realize just how cold she'd been. "First, to get you something to eat," Trump said firmly. "Then to a hotel where you can rest properly." He noticed how she tensed at his words. "This isn't charity, Catherine. This is one classmate helping another. Remember when you shared your lunch with me that time I forgot mine during debate practice?" She relaxed slightly at that, managing a small laugh. "You offered me your dessert for a week after that." "Exactly. Consider this me paying back that debt, with interest." The car glided through the city streets, passing bright storefronts and restaurants full of dinner crowds. Catherine watched the scenes through the window, as if seeing the city with new eyes. Trump used this time to make another quiet phone call, arranging things at the hotel. When they pulled up to a prestigious hotel, Catherine's hands began trembling. "I can't go in there," she whispered. "Not looking like this. People will stare." Trump stepped out first, then offered his hand again. "Let them stare," he said quietly. "You've carried yourself with more dignity on those streets than most people do in penthouses. Besides," he added with a hint of his familiar confidence, "you're with me." The hotel staff, true professionals, treated them with perfect courtesy. The manager personally escorted them to a suite, where they found a selection of clean clothes laid out and a hot meal waiting. "The bathroom's through there," Trump said gently. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait out here." He gestured to the sitting area where the food was arranged. Catherine stood in the middle of the luxurious room, looking lost. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "You don't owe me anything. We were just classmates." Trump sat down in one of the plush chairs, making himself comfortable to show he wasn't going anywhere. "Because success isn't just about making money or building towers," he said thoughtfully. "It's about remembering where we came from and who helped us along the way. You were part of my story, Catherine. You challenged me, made me work harder, think better." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But more than that, I'm doing this because it's right. Because everyone deserves a second chance, especially someone who worked as hard as you did." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but these were different from the ones she'd shed on the street. These held something new, hope. "Take a shower, change your clothes, and then we'll eat," Trump continued practically. "After that, we'll talk about tomorrow. Not next month, not next year, just tomorrow. Sometimes that's all we need to focus on, the next step forward." As Catherine disappeared into the bathroom, Trump heard the shower start running. He looked out the window at the city lights, thinking about how many others like Catherine might be out there, brilliant minds, hard workers who'd been knocked down by circumstances beyond their control. The sound of running water mixed with the distant city noise, and Trump began making more calls, setting things in motion. He knew that one night in a hotel wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. Sometimes, he reflected, the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. The streetlights cast long shadows as Trump sat beside Catherine, both of them aware of how strange they must look to passers-by. "Would you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. "Only if you want to, of course." He noticed how she gripped the edges of his coat, as if gathering strength from its warmth. "It's funny," Catherine began, her voice steadier now. "Sometimes I still wake up thinking I'm in my old apartment on Park Avenue." She smiled faintly, looking up at the towering buildings around them. "I had made it, you know, really made it." Trump nodded, remembering the financial headlines from years ago. Catherine had become something of a legend on Wall Street, known for her brilliant investment strategies and uncanny ability to predict market trends. "You were one of the best," he said quietly. I was, she agreed, no pride in her voice, just simple acknowledgement of fact. The first few years after graduation were like a dream. Everything I touched turned to gold. I had the corner office, the view of Central Park, everything we'd talked about back in school. A cool breeze rustled through the street, sending an empty coffee cup rolling past their feet. Catherine watched it with distant eyes, lost in memories. The crash of '08 was the beginning, she continued. I saw it coming, warned my clients to pull out. Most of them did. But my family, her voice cracked slightly. My parents, my sister, they trusted me completely. You know best, they said. You're the financial wizard. So I took risks with their money that I wouldn't have taken with clients' funds. I thought I could beat the market. She paused, swallowing hard. I was wrong. Trump listened silently, understanding all too well how quickly fortunes could change. He'd had his own close calls over the years, moments when everything could have crumbled. But he'd always managed to bounce back. Not everyone was so lucky. They'd lost everything, Catherine continued, her voice barely above a whisper. My father had a heart attack when he heard the news. The stress was too much. Mom had to sell their house to pay for his medical bills. My sister's kids had to leave college. She brushed away a tear with a trembling hand. I tried to make it right. Worked around the clock, took bigger risks, trying to earn it all back. The evening crowd had thinned now, leaving them in relative privacy. A street sweeper rumbled past, its brushes making a rhythmic sound against the pavement. Then I got sick, she said, really sick. The doctors found a tumor. She touched her head unconsciously. The surgery was successful, but the bills, she shook her head. No insurance company would touch me after that. My savings disappeared into medical debt. Trump felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. How many times had he walked past people on these streets, never knowing their stories, never imagining they might once have lived in penthouses and made million-dollar deals? The final blow came when my mother passed away, Catherine said, her voice stronger now, as if telling the story was helping her reclaim some part of herself. I couldn't even afford to go to the funeral. My sister hasn't spoken to me since. Can't say I blame her. She straightened up slightly, adjusting the coat around her shoulders. You know what's strange? Even after losing the money, the career, the apartment, I still had hope. I kept thinking, I'm smart, I'm educated, I'll bounce back. But when you're sick, when you can't afford medications, when no one will hire you because you've been out of the workforce too long, she gestured at her surroundings. It happens so gradually you barely notice. One day you're staying with a friend, then sleeping in your car then. Trump noticed how her hands, despite everything, were still manicured, probably done with borrowed nail clippers, a small attempt to maintain the standards she'd once lived by. Her worn shoes were carefully tied, and even her cart of belongings was neatly organized. The hardest part, she said, looking directly at him now, isn't the cold or the hunger. It's becoming invisible. People walk past like you don't exist. Former colleagues cross the street to avoid you. You start to wonder if you ever really existed at all, if that other life was just a dream. The city lights twinkled above them like distant stars, indifferent to the stories playing out beneath them. Trump realized that Catherine's story wasn't just about financial ruin or bad luck. It was about how quickly the gap between success and failure could be crossed, about how many small misfortunes it took to unravel a life that had seemed unshakable. Taking a deep breath, Trump took a step closer to the doorway. The evening crowds rushed past, creating a bubble of privacy in the midst of the busy street. Catherine, he said again, his voice gentle but firm. This time she couldn't pretend she hadn't heard him. Slowly, she raised her head, and their eyes met properly for the first time in decades. Despite the dirt and exhaustion on her face, those eyes still held the same sharp intelligence he remembered. But now they were filled with a mixture of recognition, shame, and something else, a quiet dignity that refused to be completely broken. "Hello, Donald," she said softly, her voice hoarse but still carrying traces of her old confidence. I didn't expect to see you here." She attempted a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, trying to maintain some semblance of their old dynamic, as if they were just two classmates running into each other at a coffee shop. Trump felt his throat tighten. The way she tried to sit up straighter, to smooth down her tattered coat as if it were still the pristine uniform she used to wear, It struck him harder than any business setback ever had. This was Catherine Miller, the girl who had once confidently explained complex economic theories to their entire debate club, now trying to maintain her dignity while sitting on cold concrete. A businessman hurried past, accidentally kicking one of Catherine's few possessions, a worn leather bag that had seen better days. Trump noticed how she quickly reached for it, holding it close like it contained something precious. Perhaps it did, memories of a different life, proof of who she used to be. "It's been a long time," Trump said, removing his coat despite the chill in the air. Without asking permission, he draped it over her shoulders. The simple act seemed to break something in Catherine's carefully maintained facade. Her hands clutched the warm fabric, and tears began to well up in her eyes. "I never thought," she started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I never thought anyone from the old days would see me like this, especially not you." She looked down at her hands, which still bore the neat, trimmed nails of someone trying to maintain standards despite impossible circumstances. The city lights were beginning to flicker on around them, casting a gentle glow that softened the harsh realities of the street. A young couple walked past, their laughter floating on the evening air, reminding them both of easier days, of times when the future had seemed full of nothing but promise. "Do you remember the economics competition in senior year?" Trump asked, carefully lowering himself to sit beside her, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. "You beat everyone with your analysis of market trends. Even the judges were impressed." Catherine let out a small laugh that turned into a cough. "That feels like a different lifetime," she said, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. "A different person." Trump noticed how she unconsciously straightened her posture at the memory, as if muscle memory was reminding her of who she used to be. The streetlights caught the silver in her hair that he remembered as being deep brown and always neatly styled. "You know," he said carefully, "I've learned over the years that life has a way of throwing curveballs at us. Sometimes the smartest people, the most capable people, find themselves in situations they never expected." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But that doesn't change who they are inside." A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek, cutting a clean path through the dirt. She quickly wiped it away, a gesture that reminded Trump of their school days when showing any weakness was unthinkable. "I used to read about you in the papers," she admitted quietly. "Watch you on TV. I always thought maybe one day I'd reach out, when things got better." But they never did. The evening air grew colder, and the steady stream of commuters began to thin. A street vendor packing up his cart nearby cast curious glances in their direction, probably wondering why someone in an expensive suit was sitting on the ground next to a homeless woman. Trump felt the weight of the moment, the strange twist of fate that had brought them here. In all his years of business deals and high-stakes negotiations, few moments had felt as crucial as this one. Here was someone who had once been his equal, perhaps even his superior in some ways, waiting to see if he would acknowledge their shared humanity or treat her as just another unfortunate soul on the streets of New York. The city hummed around them, a constant reminder of the world that had brought them both success and failure in such different measures. But in that moment, Trump knew that what happened next would define more than just their reunion. It would speak to the very heart of who they both were and who they still could be. The crisp autumn wind whipped through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, sending fallen leaves dancing across the sidewalk. Donald Trump had just wrapped up another long business meeting at Trump Tower, and despite his busy schedule, he decided to take a short walk to clear his mind. The golden hour sun cast long shadows between the towering skyscrapers, painting the city in warm hues of amber and orange. As he walked down Fifth Avenue, his thoughts drifted to the upcoming real estate projects and business deals that always seemed to fill his days. The familiar sounds of the city, honking taxis, chattering pedestrians, and the distant rumble of the subway created the usual symphony of New York life. But something different caught his attention today. In the shadow of a prestigious department store's doorway, a figure huddled beneath layers of worn blankets and old newspapers. Normally, Trump would have walked past, his mind occupied with business matters. But today, something made him slow his pace. Maybe it was the way the person's hands clutched a worn book, or perhaps it was the glimpse of dignity in their posture despite their circumstances. As he drew closer, the person shifted slightly, and a ray of sunlight fell across their face. Trump felt his heart skip a beat. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. Behind the weathered face and tangled gray hair, he saw a ghost from his past. His mind raced back to his days at New York Military Academy, to the inter-school competitions, to the fierce debates and academic rivalries that had pushed him to excel. Catherine? He whispered, almost to himself. Catherine Miller? The woman's head snapped up at the sound of her name, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Those same intelligent eyes that had once challenged him in debate club now widened with recognition and shame. She quickly turned away, pulling her tattered coat closer around her shoulders as if trying to disappear into the building's shadow. Trump stood there, frozen in disbelief. Catherine Miller had been the star student of the neighboring girls' school, always top of her class, always the one to beat. She had dreams of becoming a financial wizard on Wall Street, and everyone knew she had the brains to make it happen. She was the girl who had once corrected their economics teacher's explanation of market forces, the one who had won every math competition she entered. The contrast between his memories and the reality before him was staggering. His mind struggled to bridge the gap between the confident young woman who had once quoted Adam Smith with ease and this person before him, surrounded by the few possessions she could call her own. A gust of wind scattered some papers near her feet, pages torn from what looked like a financial journal. As she scrambled to gather them, Trump noticed her hands were clean and her movements retained a certain grace despite her circumstances. This wasn't someone who had given up. This was someone who had fallen hard and was still trying to hold on to who they were. The bustling city continued its usual pace around them, but in that moment, everything else faded into the background. Here were two people who had started their journeys with similar dreams, now standing on opposite sides of fortune's vast divide. Trump felt something shift inside him, a realization that success and failure weren't always simply about making the right choices. Sometimes life had other plans. As he watched Catherine trying to avoid his gaze, he remembered how she had once helped him understand a complex calculus problem, explaining it with patience and clarity until it finally clicked. Now, decades later, their roles had somehow reversed in ways neither of them could have imagined. The weight of this realization pressed heavy on his shoulders, and he knew he couldn't simply walk away. The city's rhythm continued around them, people rushing past, cars honking in the distance, the endless motion of urban life. But for Trump, time stood still as he considered his next move. This wasn't just another business decision. This was about something more fundamental, more human. The question wasn't whether to help, but how to help in a way that would truly make a difference.